Hello, I'm Bob Ross, and I'll show you step by step how to paint some beautiful little paintings very easy.
Before Bob Ross would coin the term, we don't make mistakes, we have happy accidents.
Canvassing, very soon you learn to use all these beautiful little things that happen. I think in one of the earlier shows I mentioned, we don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
Before Bob Ross, his soothing voice would win over the hearts of all of his viewers.
I like to wash this brush. It's a lot of fun. There we go, shake off the excess. And just beat the devil out of it.
Before Bob Ross's signature look would inspire parodies in games, film, and TV shows such as Smite, The Boondocks, Deadpool, and Family Guy.
Now we're going to use a fan brush here, and I want you to take some hunter green, and we're going to put a happy little bush right down over here in the corner there. And that'll just be our little secret. And if you tell anyone that that bush is there, I will come to your house and I will cut you. Oh, jeez, mine doesn't look anything like his. Ah, to hell with it.
Before Bob Ross would have some of his paintings displayed in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History.
You'd say out loud, your work will never hang in a museum.
No.
Bob!
Well, maybe it will, but probably not the Smithsonian.
Because why, Bob? What's the deal here? What are you telling us?
Well, I'm trying to teach people a form of art that anybody can do. This is art for anyone who's ever wanted to put a dream on canvas.
Bob Ross was a friendly, nurturing boy who grew up helping restore injured animals back to their full health. After dropping out of school in the 9th grade to help his dad as a carpenter, Ross would then join the U.S. Air Force at 18 and would remain with them for 2 decades. While serving, Ross would take a painting class to help deal with the daily stress of being a part of the Army. This would lead to Ross having one of the most, if not the most successful art shows to ever be on the air, with over a decade of seasons and over 30,000 paintings drawn. After his untimely passing in 1995 due to a battle with cancer, Ross's legacy would live on, inspiring those all over the world to continue watching his show over 20 years later. We're here to tell you guys all about the incredible journey the late Bob Ross had, becoming the most famous TV painter of all time. What's going on, guys? I'm your host, Bronstein, and in today's video we'll be taking a look at the incredible career of Bob Ross. We've done other videos in memory of incredible artists and creatives who have impacted our lives, most recently Cameron Boyce and Nipsey Hussle. As always, we love hearing from you guys, so please drop a comment down below with who you'd like us to cover next, but let's get right into this one.
Glad you could join me today. Today I thought we'd do a fantastic little painting maybe it's deep in the woods and it's very dark and misty, and I think you'll enjoy that.
Bob Ross was born Robert Norman Ross in Daytona Beach, Florida on October 29, 1942 and grew up in Orlando. His father Jack Ross would work as a carpenter and his mother Ollie Ross as a waitress. At a very young age, Bob's parents would separate and Bob's mother would remarry, giving birth to Bob's younger half-brother Jim. Eventually Bob's parents would reunite and get remarried, but unfortunately shortly after, Bob's father, Jack, would pass away. Growing up, Bob would tend to injured animals and throughout his childhood would have pet snakes, alligators, and squirrels whom he'd care for, to name a few. Bob wasn't the best student in school, which he explained in passing while painting X's to make a blue sky on one of his shows.
Little X's. There. That's just the way the teacher used to grade my paper in school. She'd just run across it and go ch-ch-ch-ch-ch.
Eventually, Bob would drop out of school in the 9th grade to help his father, working as a carpenter. In his youth, Bob would have an accident that would see him lose part of his index finger on his left hand. The injury, however, wouldn't affect Ross's painting skills, as he used his right hand to paint. However, during the show, if you look closely at the palette, you could actually see a part of Ross's finger missing on his left hand. In 1961, when Ross was 18, he joined the U.S. Army, more specifically the Air Force, and would be stationed in his home state of Florida as a medical records technician. In 1963, Ross would be transferred to the Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska. Ross would work in the Air Force for 20 years, working his way up through the ranks and eventually being promoted to Master Sergeant toward the end of his career.
And I used to come home, take off my little soldier hat, put on my painter's hat.
Although Ross is known for being a soft-spoken, friendly figure, while in the Army he had to yell at those under him, something he really didn't enjoy doing. He told the Orlando Sentinel in 1990, I quote, "I was the guy who makes you scrub the latrine, the guy who makes you make your bed, the guy who screams at you for being late to work. The job requires you to be a mean, tough person." And I was fed up with it. I promised myself that if I ever got away from it, it wasn't going to be that way anymore.
See there? Look at that. Isn't that a nice little tree? And he lives right here in this brush.
In 1965, Ross would marry his first wife, Vivian Ridge, who he would have his only son, Stephen Ross, with, born in 1966. While working with the Air Force, Bob attended a painting class at a USO club in hopes it would help him deal with the stress that would come from work. This is when his interest in painting would really begin. Although he admits he didn't care about the color theory or composition, which is what the lessons would focus on, instead of teaching you how to paint a tree, for example. Ross would continue painting over the years during his service, which is when he would also get a job as a bartender to help him make some extra money. Ross would sell tourists landscape he'd paint on gold pans, and one day in 1975 while bartending, Bob saw on TV a German painter named Bill Alexander painting on the show The Magic of Oil Painting.
Love you, and a hug. Isn't that wonderful? I feel like that. I have to paint a painting afternoon today, because I want to put a nice variety into that.
Alexander would use a technique called alla prima, or the wet-on-wet technique, that would allow him to paint complete pictures in just under 30 minutes. Bob would study the show and eventually learn Alexander's technique, which would allow Bob to finish as many as 2 paintings over the span of his 30-minute lunch break while working for the Air Force. During this time, Ross would also divorce from his first wife and meet his second wife, Jane Ross, in 1977. Over time, Ross would start making more money by selling his paintings than he would with the military. This would lead to him eventually leaving the Air Force after 20 years of service to solely focus on painting and train under his mentor, Bill Alexander, in 1981.
And it took me about a year to find him. I studied with Bill, and when I retired from the military, they offered me a position with the Magic Art Company as a traveling art instructor.
At the time, Ross would move back to Florida where Alexander lived, so he could study under him directly. Alexander took Ross under his wing and happily taught him everything he knew. Eventually, Ross would be hired by Alexander as a traveling tutor for the Alexander Magic Arts Supply Company. Bob would travel all over the country to teach people Alexander's technique, which actually originally came from 16th century painters, although Alexander claimed he was the original creator. Around this time, a man named Walter Kowalski had signed his wife, Annette Kowalski, up for one of Alexander's 5-day workshops after her eldest son would be involved in a fatal car accident. Annette would spend her days in bed watching Alexander's TV show, so Walter signed her up for the class. At first, when she found out Alexander wasn't teaching the class, she was reluctant to go, especially after hearing it was being taught by some guy named Bob. Walter convinced her to go anyway, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions she ever made, both for her and Bob. Over the course of the 5-day workshop, Annette realized how Bob's voice and demeanor affected those who watched and listened to him. In her own words, she was mesmerized by him. On the last day of the workshop, Annette and Walter invited Bob out to dinner, and that's when she told Bob, "I wish you would come to Washington, D.C. and teach a class," to which he said, okay. Following their discussion, Bob would quit working for Alexander, who at the time had retired from teaching, and would form a partnership with Walter and Annette. At first, Bob, Annette, and Walter struggled getting people interested in joining Bob for his lessons because not too many people knew Bob or how good he was at what he did. They'd buy newspaper ads, have demonstrations in local shopping malls, and even teach evening classes hoping for a better attendance. None seemed to do the trick. However, during an evening class, when only one man showed up, Annette told Bob they weren't going to go through with it. Bob disagreed and taught the one man his lesson. After the lesson, the man, who happened to be quite wealthy, told Bob and Annette he was so impressed with Bob's ability and patience that he'd be willing to offer them $1 million for 40% of their profits for the rest of his life. They turned down the offer and continued teaching in art shops and shopping centers. Around this time, money was getting quite tight, which led to Bob growing out his hair and getting a perm so he wouldn't have to get haircuts as often. This would also be the birth of Bob's soon-to-be signature look.
Hello, I'm Bob Ross.
Needing to change things up, Annette turned to Bob's former mentor, Bill Alexander, and asked if he'd be willing to do a commercial with Bob promoting his classes. Bill would agree and the commercial would be shot.
I hand over that almighty brush to almighty man, Bob.
Thank you very much, Bill. We've had so many cards requesting classes in this area that we've decided to set one up here, and we will have a class going in the near future. We'll produce some almighty painters.
However, when they recorded the commercial, it needed to be reformatted so local TV stations could run it. They would turn to WNVC, a local TV station, who after seeing the commercial were so impressed with Bob's skills, asked if Annette and Bob would be interested in doing a TV series. After agreeing to terms, the two would come up with the idea of a show and called it The Joy of Painting with Bob Ross, which would first air on January 11th, 1983. At this point, Bob had grown tired of his signature hair, but realized he couldn't change it because it's what made him distinct. Aside from his hair, everything from the set design of a black curtain and just an easel to what Bob would be wearing was thought out. Bob even told Annette these television programs could go on for years. I want to be sure and wear something on television that looks as good 30 years from now as it does today. Little did he know, the show, which would see Bob start with a blank canvas and finish with a completed painting, would run for over a decade and to this day still intrigue younger audiences. So much so, in 2015, Twitch would host a 9-day marathon of Bob Ross's show, which would clock in 5.6 million million unique views and eventually would lead to an entire season of The Joy of Painting being streamed once a week. Bob also wanted to publish a how-to book for those who couldn't watch his shows. The TV network said they couldn't help him out with that, and the costs would be around $30,000. So Annette and Walt mortgaged their house, and they made the first of many editions of Experience the Joy of Painting with Bob Ross. With every season of the show produced, a book would also be produced. After the first season of the show aired, and WNBC not seeing a viewership they would have liked to see, they decided to cut ties with Ross. At this time, Bob would continue teaching his classes, and with a season of a TV show under his belt, would also start searching for a new station to produce the show. Walt would track where Bill Alexander's show was doing well ratings-wise, and the gang would aim to have Bob teach his classes there. But once again, they needed a commercial to promote what they were doing, so they went to WIPB TV station in Indiana, knocked on the door, and asked if they could promote Bob's demonstration and art classes that he'd be teaching at the local mall. They would agree, and the turnout would be so good, Bob would end up meeting with the TV station's general manager to discuss making that the new home for his show. Before they knew it, they did have a new home for their show, and eventually would get picked up nationally. This would lead to a marketing campaign showing Bill Alexander once again handing over the brush to Bob Ross. Think of it like a rapper co-signing another rapper, but in this case, it's painters. You get it.
I hand over now that almighty brush to almighty man, and that is Bob Ross. Congratulate you.
Thank you very much, Bill. We look forward to seeing you right here on this channel for The Joy of Painting each week.
They would go on to shoot The Joy of Painting's 13 episodes in just a week. Over time, they would produce a total of 30 seasons, or over 400 episodes over Bob's incredible career. Although Bob's show was meant to inspire and have viewers paint along, people would enjoy just listening to Bob's voice and watch him work his magic. Although Bob would see a ton of success with his show, it would eventually cause a strain on his relationship with his mentor, Bill Alexander. Many say Bill would grow jealous of Bob's success, and even go as far as saying Bob betrayed him and that he took the wet-on-wet painting style he invented, although as previously mentioned, it's been around since the 16th century. Bob would continue to enjoy success with his show, even having his son Steven make frequent appearances over the years.
So I tell you what, we're going to turn it over to Steve today and let him do a fantastic little painting for you. Steve?
Thanks, Dad. Hi, glad you could join me.
Bob would eventually grow his brand so much that he would start selling his own painting supplies and paint, all branded with his signature afro and warm smile. Bob would also eventually teach others his method and certify them as Bob Ross painting instructors, allowing his technique to be taught all over the US while he was tied up filming for his own show and teaching his own classes. In the early 90s, Bob's show would be expanded internationally, reaching Canada, Mexico, Colombia, the UK, Germany, Switzerland, and Japan, as well as a few other countries all over the world. Over this time, Bob would also enjoy a loving and supportive relationship with his wife, Jane. However, in 1992, Jane would pass away after a battle with cancer. Bob would go on to marry once again to a woman named Linda Brown in May of 1995. Unfortunately, on July 4th of 1995, Bob Ross would pass away due to complications with lymphoma. This was actually his second battle with the awful disease. He first beat it before he started filming The Joy of Painting and was in remission for years. But his viewers would never know because Bob kept his private life extremely private. Up until his untimely passing, only those closest to him knew about his fight with cancer. However, Bob's legacy would live on for years, with people to this day still watching his show and being inspired by his lighthearted, warm personality.
If this is your first time with us, allow me to extend a personal invitation for you to get your brushes and your paints and paint along with us each show. And if you've been with us before, please allow me to thank you for inviting us back for another series of painting shows.
The Kowalski's family still run his company, Bob Ross Inc., today, which recently donated a handful of his paintings to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. They also have the rest of Bob's paintings at the headquarters, which is run out of Virginia. They have no interest in selling them because they know Bob had no interest in selling his paintings in the first place. And that's all for this one, guys. It was a quite long one, but I didn't want to leave any details out about this incredible man and the amazing impact he had on people all over the world. Feel free to drop a comment down below with when you first saw Bob Ross. I'm Jared Bronstein, and we'll see you guys in the next video.